Asato Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Last Sunday we celebrated Sri Ramakrishna's birthday with a special worship. And so our topic this morning is Ramakrishna of the heart. Most of you who have been coming to the Vedanta Center for long are already familiar with Sri Ramakrishna. The name of our center is Ramakrishna Vedanta Society. So Ramakrishna is not an unknown figure. And yet, sometimes it might be helpful to ask the question, do we really know who Ramakrishna was or is? There is in the Vedas, one of the very ancient hymns has this question. As you know, in the Vedic period, all of the worship, there was no image worship then. All of the worship was done in the sacred fire. And they made these oblations, offerings, to many of these deities. There are several names mentioned in the Vedas. But at some point, when they were making all these offerings and all these sacrifices in the rituals, a question came, who is this deity? Who is this divine figure? Almost a mysterious figure. While we describe that figure in many different ways as infinite, all-pervading, and so on, but who is this? Who is receiving this worship that we give? So the refrain in that hymn is, Kasmai Devaya Havisha Vidhema, comes in the Rig Veda, meaning, who is this being to whom we are offering these oblations? And that's a question that sometimes we just kind of take it for granted. We know who this being is just because we can express it in some language, in some words. But there are sometimes apparently contradictions in the way we think of the deity and the way we relate to that deity. For instance, we use names, we use expressions, we use concepts to denote that ultimate reality. At the same time, acknowledging that that ultimate supreme being is beyond all concepts, beyond names, beyond forms. And there's again another one, Sanskrit verse. This is attributed to Vyasa, the great teacher, acknowledging the mistakes we make in our concept of the Supreme and the way we try to relate with the Supreme. And the Sanskrit verse goes like this, and I will also read the translation after that. Rupam vivarjitasya bhavato dhyanena yat kalpitam stutya nirvachaniyataya kilogoro duri krita yanmaya vyapitvancha nirakritam bhagavato yat tirtha yatra dina kshantavyam jagadisha tadvikalata doshatrayam matkritam. The poet here acknowledges three mistakes, three errors that he has done. So he says, in my meditations, I have attributed form to you who is truly formless. O teacher of the world, by singing your glory, I have denied the truth that you are inexpressible. Through my travels and pilgrimage, I have ignored the truth that you are all pervading. O ruler of the universe, forgive these threefold mistakes of mine which violate your true nature. And so there has been this acknowledgement in the books, and then we might have discovered that in our own heart about how we know the Supreme Being and yet we don't know. And it's good to kind of explore this, because when we recognize that these great ones, whether we see them as the avatar, as the prophet, as great teachers, as saints, that these great ones live in two dimensions. There is the historical dimension, and then there is the spiritual dimension. Now, the historical dimension is in the domain of time. The spiritual dimension, clearly, beyond time. Now, within the domain of time, we can speak in terms of the past, present, and future. So we can look upon Ramakrishna in that way as well. What about the historical Ramakrishna? What about Ramakrishna of the past? Now, clearly, Ramakrishna was a historical figure, if you look at him that way. And as a historical person, he's separated from us through time. More than 100, 150 years almost. So although his teachings are still available, he's separated from us not just through time, but also through space. First of all, he was born in this remote village in Calcutta, just on the other side of the globe from where all of us are located here. So there is a separation with space, and there is separation with time as well. Now, how much can a figure who is separated from us both through time and space, how much close can we get to such a figure? And so there is this, although the teachings of Ramakrishna are still available in the present, there is still the desire to know who is this person whose teachings may resonate with our own head and heart. But who is this person from whom these teachings come? So knowing, sometimes it just happens that we read a lot of books of someone and we like their teachings, we may like their personality, and we may kind of feel that we kind of know them. But knowing someone in our heads is very different from actually meeting them face to face. It's like, and sometimes it can be a very disorienting experience. I mean, suppose you are a great fan of someone, whether it's some celebrity or some sports person or some artist or someone, and you have read their books or heard their music, and you have kind of, in their head, you just begin to feel you kind of know them. And let's say that someday you attend a concert or you actually happen to come very close to this great person whose fan you are. And that person maybe looks at you. Now, because we have lived with that person in our head, we think, oh, I know this person. But as far as that great person is concerned, you are just one of the hundreds of faces of fans and admirers around. So that person may look and may not respond with that look of familiarity that I might see. And that could be a little disorienting. And so there is this something that we need to find out. How much do we know Ramakrishna? And of course, one big hope would be, even when we meet Ramakrishna, we might think that we might know him. Will he know me too? I will recognize him. Will he recognize me? And so there is always this tension between knowing a person in our head and actually, and we always feel if an opportunity comes to meet such a person, then you don't want to miss it. And I may have mentioned this before. I'm almost 30 years ago, close to 30 years ago. I was in India at that time, And there was this Vietnamese monk name you have heard, Thich Nhat Hanh, and um, almost sometime in the early 90s, I read that well-known book of his, The Miracle of Mindfulness. And I really liked that book very much. I simply completely resonated with the, the teachings that he gave in that one. And it so turned out, just after 5 or 6 years after I had read that book, I heard that he's visiting in Chennai, in Madras, where I was that time. And so clearly, I had read that book, I had liked that book, and at that time never even imagined I would ever even have a chance of seeing the author. But then it turned out he was visiting the city, and I got a chance to meet with him. Now, luckily, at that time, he was still living. He has passed away some years ago now. But there wasn't that separation of time. We were kind of contemporaries because we both were living at that time. I still am, I think. And there was no separation of space because we both found ourselves in the same city. And so meeting him, it was wonderful. It was very different from reading a book by someone and actually meeting the person. So that's the difference between knowing Ramakrishna through books and actually meeting Ramakrishna. There's another one incident which I really like very much about that when we adore someone, we want to not just see them, we want, as far as possible, go as close to them as possible. And there is this incident from the life of Maurice Sendak, who was a previous generation. He was born in 1928, passed away about 12 or 13 years ago. He was the well-known author and illustrator of children's books. Again, I think the new generation might not know, but his book, Where the Wild Things Are, was first published in the early 60s, became very popular. So he in his memoirs, he writes that he always answered his fan mail, especially from children, because the books were primarily for children, and he received lots and lots of letters from children. So he said, he wrote in his memoirs, he said, "A little boy sent me a charming card with a little drawing on it. I loved it. I answer all my children's letters, sometimes very hastily, but this one I lingered over. I sent him a card and I drew a picture of a wild thing on it. I wrote, 'Dear Jim, I loved your card.'" And he sent off that letter along with his hundreds of fan letters that he sends. Then he said, then he got a letter back from his mother, and she said, "Jim loved your card so much, he ate it." And Maurice Sendak writes, "That to me was the highest compliment I have ever received." He said that little boy didn't care that it was an original Maurice Sendak drawing or anything, which would have normally you would have thought, oh, this, if I can put it on auction, I'll get a lot in return. He says, this little boy, he saw it, he loved it, he ate it. That's something. If you adore something, you just want it to be as close to us as possible. And so therefore, if Ramakrishna's teaching, Ramakrishna as a personality, as an ideal, resonates with us, one natural inkling would be, how can I go close to him? How can he come? And that's, again, we are speaking about Ramakrishna, but this pretty much applies to whichever spiritual ideal comes close to our heart, whether it's Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, whoever, that how can that ideal become real, come close to me, not remain simply a distant figure, not simply remain something in my head. Now, one way clearly that most of us have come to know Ramakrishna is through his books. And as I've often said, one way to benefit from reading Ramakrishna is to put us in that context. So when you're reading the gospel, it's possible to see it as a historical document, that these are the teachings Ramakrishna gave to those people in that place. And I'm now 100 years later reading about that. But it's also possible, if we have a little imaginative mind, to say, no, when Ramakrishna is speaking to those, then there are a bunch of names mentioned in the book, whether Narendra, Rakal, and so many of them. I can, with a little bit of imagination, you can insert your name in that one and say, with all those people sitting in Ramakrishna's room, I too am sitting. And makes a big difference, because then it's not something he's telling them. It becomes I am sitting in the room, he's something, whatever he's saying is telling me. And that's when study becomes a self-study. Self-study is not simply study that is done by the self. Self-study is a study that is done that applies to me. So study is adhyayana in Sanskrit. It becomes swadhyaya, swa, when I apply that teaching in my own specific life situation. So when we read something in a spiritual text, it makes sense, then not just keep it like some cerebral thing, some intellectual thing, something that I like. Well, if it makes sense, if it has a ring of truth to it, then I have to apply it here. That if it's real, if it's true, in my specific situation right now, how can I put it into practice? How will this teaching shape my thinking? How will it shape my relationships? How will it shape my approach to the work that I do? Only when I apply that, then that teaching can have that transforming power. So that's one way to bring Ramakrishna in present, the Ramakrishna of the past into the present, by applying his teachings in our own life. We also see that when we apply his teachings in life, we actually begin to experience benefit. We are actually able to experience some transformation inside. And this may not happen overnight, but sometimes it could take a few months or sometimes years. Then we'll think about what we were or how we thought, say 5 or 10 years ago, and how I am now as a person. Then it's a little bit easier to see what kind of changes have occurred in me. Changes for the good or changes for the worse. But hopefully, if I've taken these teachings to heart and if I'm serious and sincere about it, I will find a lot of positive changes that have occurred. One other way to bring the Ramakrishna of the past into the present is to see how his power is not only working in my own life, in my own little way, but how it is shaping the lives of people around. And oftentimes we see it even in a kind of a more visible way through these groups or organizations which are inspired by his teaching. And clearly, Vedanta Society is one of that, where Ramakrishna is the founding light of that. And then we see that it is the inspiration that's filtered out through him that is doing this, bringing about benefit, not only through individuals, but through even groups of people. And that's how we see Ramakrishna as a person, as a power working even today. But that's good enough, bringing Ramakrishna of the past into the present. What we want is something more. And that's what meeting someone face to face is. That when we meet someone directly, then that moment, that meeting occurs in the present moment. We cannot meet someone, when I'm meeting someone, it happens right now. It doesn't happen in the past, it doesn't happen in the future, it happens right now. And so that meeting can occur only in meditation. And that's where we come to Ramakrishna of the heart. So somehow, Ramakrishna of the ideas and concepts, something that may emotionally resonate with us or intellectually resonate with us, has to come even closer. And as I've often mentioned, and you have heard it very often from me, and also may have read it in other sources and books and so on, that the word heart comes in many different contexts in spiritual texts. The Upanishads speak about, in one of the Upanishads says, tam durdarsham guhahitam Kauvareshtham Puranam. Guha is a cave. Oftentimes, the reality, the image they use is in the cave of the heart. Now we know, if you enter most caves, if they are deep enough, it's pretty dark there. And that's essentially how it happens. When we are asked to think about the divine in our heart, we close our eyes and you look in the cave, it's dark. But then if you go, not if you're not afraid of the dark, and you say, no, I know the divine is there, and you stay there and try to look, then somehow that light comes. So the heart as an image comes again and again in the books. Now, obviously, very obviously, it's not the anatomical heart, not the physiological heart, because there isn't any place for the divine to stay there. It's just filled with all blood and all kinds of things there. So when we are trying to think of the divine in the heart, although it's in the same area, it's not the physiological heart. But then we also use the word heart to see it as a seat of emotions and feelings. We know that when we are overwhelmed with some strong emotions or feeling, we feel a certain heaviness here. And sometimes people touch their heart and say, it's with a heavy heart, or my heart is filled with joy. So all these feelings and emotions, we also feel something here. So not only is this area a place where there is a physiological heart, this is also a seat of emotions and feelings. That's why sometimes people make the thing, cerebral, that's very in the head, and emotions or feelings are in the heart. So there is the physiological heart, there is the emotional heart. So when we are asked to meditate in the heart, that is neither of these two hearts. It is actually the spiritual heart. So, although it's going to sound weird, there are really three hearts. One heart is the physiological heart. And then most of us have experienced strong feelings and emotions at different occasions. So we know what in feeling strong emotions feels. But there is also this third heart, spiritual heart. Now, what many of these texts say is that this heart is like a door that's closed for in the beginning for almost everyone. And because the door is closed, when we try to think, we're just seeing darkness because the door isn't opened yet. And so one of the first challenges in meditation is really to discover that spiritual heart. And before that heart is discovered, although it might seem, we might use the word prayer and meditation, especially meditation, that I'm meditating on the divine. In the beginning, before that heart is, the door to heart is open, or the heart is open, it kind of sounds very esoteric. In the beginning, it's really more about ourselves. Even when we are trying to meditate, because we're just seeing darkness, it's first of all getting to know ourselves, because meditation is me in the presence of God. But when right now we are not even seeing God in the heart, then it's just me there. So one benefit, even before one has had a chance to experience God in meditation, would be a chance to meet our own selves. And that's something important, that we sometimes live under an illusion that I don't know a lot about this world, but I know who I am. And that may not be true. Yes, of course, we know a little bit about who we are, but we probably do not know our own selves fully. And part of the reason is almost all of our waking hours, we are so busy with everything that's happening around us, and all these sounds, thoughts, images, tastes, all these things coming from outside. All of our time and energy is spent in dealing with all this enormous data from the external world. And then of course we are exhausted by the end of the day, and we just fall asleep. We wake up in the morning, and again, boom, 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 all these data comes. where there is really no time to know who we are, who is the one processing all this data. And so in the beginning stages, every meditation really is an opportunity to know ourselves. But a lot of times people, when they see, oh, I'm trying to meditate and you seek darkness, I don't see God, and then a lot of time people get discouraged or they get bored. Actually, it shouldn't be so boring because I'm just seeing myself. At least I can say, well, who is this person inside? And so when and how will this heart be discovered? And a simple answer is clearly, if we live according to dharma, if we live with some principles in life. It just doesn't happen by accident. Clearly, there is divine grace involved, but we become aware of that grace only if, as Ramakrishna pointed out, we live honestly, truthfully, with kindness in heart, without hurting anyone in any way. So people who live by such values and such principles, it is in their case, suddenly we find the door seems to open. And it is there, in that heart, that Ramakrishna is present. So it is in meditation that we discover Ramakrishna. One of the advantages, in some sense, you could say, in Ramakrishna, because he is historically closer to us in time, and so he came in an era when photography wasn't as advanced as it is today, but still, there was photography then. And so we don't have to imagine so much about how he may have looked. His photographs is available, not too many, just 3 or 4 of them, but still gives us some idea about how he looked. So the photographs of Ramakrishna are helpful in visualizing how he was. But there could be one trap, that when we try to visualize Ramakrishna, we should not be visualizing the photograph. A photograph can be helpful in visualizing how Ramakrishna was in flesh and blood. But a photograph is not Ramakrishna. It's like well, the mango season is coming, so I can mention about it. So if you look at a picture of a mango or a photograph, it can remind us of the real mango. But then if you want to eat it, you can't eat the picture of the mango. Not tasty. You need a real mango. And so a photograph of Ramakrishna will be helpful, but if I truly want to meet Ramakrishna, then it's not. So when we try to visualize, don't visualize a murti or an image or a photograph. Visualize a real living. And that's why putting ourselves in that context, sitting there in that room in Dakshineshwar, or being in that Bhavatarini Kali temple and seeing, oh, Ramakrishna is doing worship there, and I'm sitting behind watching him do the puja. That kind of a creative imagination helps to kind of take our mind away from these photographs and images and visualize and the reality of Ramakrishna. And there's oftentimes there is a phrase that gets often used, God realization. And the word realization can be understood in many different ways. But I like to think of realization as making something real. That as long as things remain in the form of ideas and concepts, it's still very cerebral. But they'll become real when we just are face to face with them. And so God realization or realizing God would mean God is not simply something I just feel about or something or someone I can think about, but someone I can see. And so that's a big subject, but enough to point out that thinking about God is not meditation. Thinking about God is thinking about God. But meditation, in the truest sense of the term, would mean seeing God. So meditating on Ramakrishna means seeing Ramakrishna. And of course, the kind of challenge most of us face is that when we close our eyes and try to look in the heart, we don't see Ramakrishna, we just see darkness. Then you say, well, now what do I do? And then, of course, then the next thing would be, well, if you can't see him, think about him. And thinking has this enormous power. It's a little bit like, think about this deep sea diving. When you are on the surface of water, there are all these waves and ripples, there's a lot of disturbance. But those who have done diving and you go deep and deep and deep, the deeper you go in the depth of the ocean, you'll find the water is very still. Maybe someone can go right to the bottom of the Pacific or the Atlantic. You'll find everything is very still there. All the movement is on top. And that's essentially how it is in the heart. In the mind, so long as we remain at the superficial level, of course there's going to be all this stress, tension, ideas, boom, boom, boom. It's not. We need to dive deep inside our own minds. That is why this one Bengali song Ramakrishna used to sing very often. Dive deep, my mind, go deep inside. There you will find the deep treasures into that deep ocean. And so, just as when we go down inside the bottom of the ocean, it becomes still, thinking at some point changes into seeing. It's a little bit like one of the images that comes to mind is when we are trying to sleep at night. We're lying in our bed, we switch off the light, and then we are kind of turning and twisting. We are in a kind of waking state, hoping sleep would come. And then we never know when the exact moment sleep comes, we never know. So at one moment we are thinking and saying, and boom, suddenly it stops, and then seeing, dream begins. A little bit like that can happen. That when we start thinking about the divine, thinking about your Ishta, thinking about the object of your meditation, then when that thinking becomes deep, thinking is an art. Yes, every one of us has the ability to think. That does not mean that every one of us thinks well. Because thinking needs a certain amount of discipline. It needs a certain amount of I'm not able to find the right word. It's a little bit like, put it this way. If we have gotten used to jumping from one idea to the other all the time, then thinking becomes very difficult. Then we think about, we can sometimes see that on a dining table or when we are having tea or coffee. We start discussing some subject and then someone says something and then someone says something, and within 2 or 3 minutes, we have already gone on to a different subject. And so thinking as a disciplined activity would mean to develop the habit, if I hold on to an idea or a subject, to kind of hold on to it and try to examine it from every direction. Then something productive, something creative might come. I might improve my understanding. But we rarely do that. We take up an idea and then a comment comes, some other related idea comes, and we go from there, and we end up with some completely different subject. So thinking as an art would mean, even if I'm thinking about my Ishta, thinking about my object of meditation, then can I hold on to that idea and leave every other idea alone? Yes, it is thinking. It's not meditation yet. But that kind of a focused thinking, that one idea, holding on to that, if and when that is achieved, at some point, we don't know when, we don't know how, that thinking stops on its own. And when that thinking stops, seeing begins. Again, we never know when it is going to happen, just like we don't know which point we are going to enter into sleep. And so, thinking itself is not meditation, but deep thinking can lead to meditation, provided it's a very disciplined thinking. It's not dealing with 100 ideas, just with one form. And that's why oftentimes we are asked to think about one form, the form of the chosen deity. Think about one sound, the sound of your prayer, the sound of your mantra. So if I can have that discipline to not get distracted by any other sound, not get distracted by any other form, if I can hold on to that one form and one sound, then that form, that sound has the power, that ability to kind of just stop. And when it stops, seeing will begin. And that is when we meet Ramakrishna. That is seeing Ramakrishna in the heart. That is the actual meeting of Ramakrishna face to face. So we have gone beyond ideas, beyond forms, beyond concepts, and actually meeting Ramakrishna as he truly is. And oftentimes, it's good to meet, and it's a little bit like this. When you meet someone more often, then not only you know that person well, that person knows you well too. And so it might be a good practice to try to meet the object of our meditation as often as we can in the heart, so that when we meet more in a more constant form, both may recognize and meet and be happy with each other. So it's good to keep, and just as these great teachers, I said, live in a historical dimension and spiritual dimension, every one of us, we live in these two dimensions. There is clearly our body and mind belongs to the historical dimension. The Atman belongs to the spiritual dimension. So long as we remain trapped, so to speak, most of our waking hours, all of the time and energy that is disposable to me, if all of them are completely devoted to just dealing with the concerns with my body and mind, and I ignore the Atman, then I'm just busy dealing with this historical dimension of mine. Every moment, we are becoming parts of history. Down the line, after 3 or 4 generations, no one would even remember our names, forget about who we were. When you think about our own family, for that matter, yes, we might, of course, we remember our parents, our grandparents, our great-grand. How far down our ancestral line, sometimes we might know the names of some of them, but beyond that, we know nothing. And if all of my time and energy is spent dealing with just this body and mind, I'm going to be history as well. There'll be nothing left, because if I just dwell continually in a historical dimension. But on the other hand, if I remember I am the Atman, then I conquer history. I'm able to transcend history and remain here and now. So just to summarize, Ramakrishna of history is discovered in books, through biographies, the reminiscences of others. And Ramakrishna of the present is discovered through the experience, the transformational experience we have through following his teachings. But Ramakrishna of the now, Ramakrishna of the present moment, is discovered in the heart through the practice of prayer, worship, and meditation. Ramakrishna of history educates us, Ramakrishna of the present inspires us, but it's Ramakrishna of the present, Ramakrishna of the heart, who can free us forever. Now, all of these so-called 3 Ramakrishnas are connected, usually in a chronological order. Ramakrishna of history leads us to Ramakrishna of the present, and Ramakrishna of the present leads us to Ramakrishna of the heart. So even through all the studies that we do, the books that we read, the pujas that we have, the goal is to discover the reality. Because most of the time, we are dealing with ideas, we are dealing with concepts. But the goal is to go beyond these ideas, beyond these concepts. Ideas and concepts can be helpful, but we need to find out all the spiritual practices that we do are helpful in helping us go beyond these ideas and meet the person, the reality of the divine in our own lives. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu.